Now, let's just move our attention towards the world of crypto for a moment, because Binance has appointed a new CEO after its $4.3 billion settlement with the US Department of Justice that forced the co-founder CZ to step down. Now, Bloomberg's Francine Lacqua sat down with Richard Teng earlier to discuss his vision for the company as the new CEO.
The US resolution with the US agencies are very important, right? There are historical issues on compliance, registration, and sanctions. And with the resolution, we move on to a new chapter, moving past a very challenging period of our corporate history. So going forward, we will continue to focus on things like user growth. On that front, I need to stress that user assets are back one-to-one. Users can withdraw 100% of their assets at any point in time. We continue to focus on user need. At the same time, we did make some mistakes along the way. We acknowledge those. It's important for us as a financial institution to do so, and we learn from those, and we continue to build in the journey, right? On things like, I think you're going to ask, where's our headquarters? We'll make those disclosures in due course, right? As part of the resolution, there are certain things that we will put in place, that we have agreed to do so, including board of directors, but those announcements will be coming soon, so watch that space.
Yeah, but Richard, can you already just give us a sense of what people want? So if they want, a more normal structure with a headquarters that was problematic in the past because there was no one single place, how fast do you think that will be done? And then I'll also ask you about the board of directors, because I guess that's what people are asking for. It's like, what kind of framework will Binance have?
Well, compared to the past, where the industry is very nascent, if you look at today, the direction of travel is very clear. There's going to be much more regulations for the crypto industry, even though only 1/3 of global regulators are regulating this space. But the direction of travel is very, very clear, right? So along with that, along with the maturing of both the industry as well as the corporate ourselves, all these things will be put in place. As I mentioned again, board of directors will be instituted based on very robust timeline. Same for things like the question that you asked. And we'll make those announcements in due course. We can't disclose that at this point in time.
But what kind of timeline, Richard, are you looking at? There are companies that are even younger than Binance that already have that infrastructure in place. So when are you thinking for a headquarter? Are you shopping around for that? And when are you thinking of actually appointing a board of directors?
So we're not, shopping around is a very broad word. We are making the assessment based on which region or which jurisdiction is the most advantageous. As you know, for a corporate like ours, where we have thousands of employees, where we have the financial strength, there are many different considerations, including things like taxation, data privacy, etc., etc. So we need to consider that very, very carefully. Once we have come to a decision, we will make those announcements.
Someone like Coinbase, of course, already have a board and have a headquarters, and are not much older than Binance. Do you think Abu Dhabi will end up being your headquarters?
No, the circumstances are different, right? Coinbase went ahead with a public listing quite early on to raise investor fund, right? Binance is very, very strong financially. We are by far the largest crypto exchange in terms of volume, and our fundamentals are extremely strong, right? So revenues and profit remain robust. Our users support us. The user trust is extremely important. We have 166 million users. Our capital structure is debt-free, right? And we have not raised outside funds. So at this point in time, there's no need for us to do a lot of those things. But we realize that regulators and our stakeholders need to see a more formal structure that they are used to. So we are putting all those things in place for the journey ahead in terms of Binance.
But you've had a huge case. We're talking about, a DOJ settlement, drastic action being taken. So I'm surprised that you don't want to maybe find a headquarter much quicker than that. Is it hard to find a headquarter? I'm trying to understand at what speed you want to go to, or it's just hard to find the right, you don't feel any pressure to find something soon. Am I right?
Look, it is a huge case, indeed. But as with all financial institutions, if you go down the list of top 50 financial institutions, the magnitude of fine in many cases are much bigger. If you look at the cumulative fine, I just did a very quick research. Bank of America has paid in excess of 80 billion of fines. So as if you look at the likes of JP Morgan, UBS, and that whole list goes on, right? So it is not unusual for financial institutions to pay fine. But what is important is all of us realize our mistakes, close those gaps, and continue to work on those gaps, because regulations are evolving, right? Standards are evolving, and we continue to need to meet the highest standards that industry and the regulators impose. Right? On the other matters that you mentioned, we are working very closely with regulators. We are getting buy-in of all our stakeholders, and we will make disclosure in due course.
You're right. Financial institutions have had fines, but this is highly unusual, Richard. I mean, you have your chief executive and founder that pleaded guilty to, anti-money laundering. We also understand from the U.S. that he can't go back for the moment to the UAE. So give me a sense, first of all, of how worried you are about the future. Can you tell us about main shareholders? What are we looking at right now? What does Binance look like? And also give me a sense of what kind of board of director or chairman you'd be looking for in terms of a type.
Well, let me correct you on that front. I don't think it's unusual for financial institutions to face challenges on things like anti-money laundering. Many institutions have breached those, right? If you look at the full list, most of the top institutions at some point in their life will face challenges. As I mentioned, it's important for us to close the gap, acknowledge past mistake, and improve, right? So that we don't commit the same mistake. CZ, as part of that settlement, has stepped off, which is, he has taken responsibility for that. And with that, I mentioned, we have moved on from a very challenging period of our corporate structure and history. And then moving forward, we will continue to focus on being, firstly, a user-led organization, right? A user focus, we need to understand the needs of our users in terms of products and services, and build the infrastructure that's able to support our 166 million users and many more that have signed on and support us in that journey. On the other hand, compliance-led organization to fulfill our obligations, to meet the global standards, working very closely with those. So that's important to make this organization sustainable. Something that has prospered not only in the past 6 years, Binance is a very young company in that sense, but continue to grow from strength to strength in the next 60 years.
I mean, will you accept that this is a pretty big drawback? And actually, will you be fully audited?
We'll be audited, we'll be regulated. We are by far still the most regulated exchange in the crypto world. Globally, we are regulated by 18 different jurisdictions, right? We work very closely. We are already scrutinized in all these jurisdictions by regulators, by auditors. Right? It's no different going forward. And going forward, we're going to step up our commitment. I think in many people's view, these are huge costs, huge burden. But we take it very positively. In the course of the last week, where I've spoken to many of our institutional clients, our VIP clients, and as well as the users that we have publicly. The overwhelming
Richard, on specifics.
Overwhelming response has been very positive, right? We have turned a page in the chapter, and we are going to make several announcements soon with new partners joining us, right? Because of this huge overhang in terms of the last 1.5, 2 years, some of these partners were reluctant to come on, but with this overcast lifted, a lot of new partnerships are moving ahead very aggressively, and we will make those announcements as and when we're ready to. Watch out, watch that space.
Okay, but Richard, give me a flavor. What kind of partnerships? Are they people that will give some legitimacy to Binance after the saga and the scandal?
Well, again, we have different players talking to us all the time. It ranges from institutional partnership to product partnership, right? So we do have all those installed. But again, I'm sure you respect those are confidential. But when we're ready, we'll make those announcements to the marketplace.
Of course, you said you'll be fully audited. When, and do you already have an accounting firm?
Again, those are information as and when that's needed. We will liaise with all our regulators, and we need to be transparent with our regulators, right? But let me stress again, We don't raise funds for the public. We are not a listed company. Our financial information are not disclosed publicly for that reason. We have very strong financial strength, and we are very confident of the fundamentals we have today to continue to build for the future.
If I speak to you in 6 months, will you have some of the answers to some of these questions in your mind?
Me again in 6 months, you'll probably get a lot more clarity. We probably have made a lot more announcement by then. Let's not preempt that. I think we are speculating too much.
So, but you're moving fast. I mean, again, we're trying to get a sense of how much you want to reshape Binance, where you're moving, what you're thinking, and trying to really understand what Binance will look like in 6, 12 months.
Well, if we take a step back, the industry has to change, right? When Binance started 6 years ago, it's a totally different landscape, totally different industry. I think many of you know that I'm an ex-regulator. I started regulating crypto space in 2017, 2018. And I'm one of the pioneers to regulate this space because at that point in time, none of the regulators pay much attention to it. If you remember, the institutions are not in this. Many of them view this as suspicion, saying it's a scam, etc., etc. But if you look at the landscape today, it has totally transformed, it has changed. And for crypto and for blockchain to continue to grow, I always maintain you need two things, right? Firstly, regulatory certainty, so as to bring about clarity, safety, and mass adoption. Secondly, you need institutions. You need greater institutional participation with the like of BlackRock, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, and you name, if you look through the list of the top 100 financial institutions, it's not hard to find that each and every one of them have a Web3, have a crypto, have a blockchain agenda. And that is very, very important. You bring a lot more new investors, a lot more new liquidity into this space, and this space will continue to grow. So I'm very bullish about this industry. The next few years, we will see much faster adoption, and the pace of adoption will pick up compared to the past 5 years. So, but we are in a different industry, we're in a different landscape. It's fast maturing. It is going to be much more regulated. In Europe, MiCA is a right step in the very important direction, providing clarity to the industry. So we applaud that, and we work with all regulators on that front that bring clarity.
But Richard,
need to comply with.
As a former regulator yourself, how hard will you work to bring Binance in tip-top shape?
Well, I hold the trust of our 166 million users dearly, right? Firstly, I hold the responsibility of this job. That's very important. I have made 3 commitments publicly in my first blog post. Firstly, to continue to be a user-focused, user-led organization, to continue to build products and services that meet the needs of users. Secondly, working with global regulators to uphold standards, right? Be it in terms of new framework or compliance with the existing framework. And thirdly, working with partners globally to continue to embrace, support, facilitate the growth of Web3. And together, we will build a very robust ecosystem. It's important to remember that crypto is still at a very early stage and very nascent in terms of development. Right? Today, we are only at 5% crypto adoption. If we, through our collective effort, can bring this adoption rate to 10, 20, 30%, you'll see multiple folds of new use cases, new investments, new liquidity, new investors coming into this space. And that makes everybody stronger. And we are building from a position of strength because we have turned the page. We are cooperating fully with regulators. And it's important to remember that we subscribe to that. We put ourselves under the remit of all these regulators, including the 18 regulators that we work with. Many other exchanges have not. We willingly commit to that. We have full transparency in terms of our books, in terms of our processes, our compliance program, our investments. Many exchanges have not done so, right? So we are continuing
Richard,
to
this comes on the back. I mean, this comes on the back of really, the U.S. saying, look, there was money laundering, there were U.S. sanction violations, and that came from the very top. So this is not like another financial institutions. If you look at your main shareholders, it's still CZ and his partner. Do you feel like you have the mandate to break from the past and really change Binance?
Binance is but it's the largest crypto exchange globally. Right? So we will be the first one to put under scrutiny now that we have, comply, we have resolved issues with the US. That attention will turn to the other players. I think let me state that at the outset. So that's why I'm stating just before your current question, we are building from a position of strength. Secondly, without CZ's trust and the other leadership's trust, and indeed trust of the thousands of employees that we have, which I hold very dearly, I would not have taken up this role. And this role, given the changing industry, a maturing industry with a direction of travel that's much more regulated, requires us to continue to work with all the important stakeholders that I mentioned, to continue to push ahead and foster, enhance the growth of the industry. So I'm very confident that we'll continue to grow from a position of strength on that front, which is why I take up this role. I use all my experience, my endeavor to make sure that we succeed for the future.
Will Yi He maintain her current executive role at the firm?
Well, our core team remains intact, and it's very important, right? So we have a strong expertise of core team. But at the same time, we continue to make investments into intellectual human talent, which is very important for our industry because the industry evolves so quickly, right? Things are evolving, new developments come up by the day, but we continue to enhance our bench strength, continue to invest in our talent pool, continue to invest heavily into our compliance program. And I'm very confident that we'll continue to grow from strength to strength.
And I know you're very positive about the future, but if you look at your market share, it still has been falling. So how do you expect to make up for that? How will you stem that?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
So the question is, of course, on your market share that has fallen because of the latest events. How will you stop that market share from being eroded? How do you grow from here?
Well, I think two responses to that. Firstly, as I mentioned, we are focused on building the ecosystem. Today is at a very early stage of development, only 5% crypto adoption. If we can double, triple, quadruple that, right? Even if our market share falls, everyone in the industry, including ourselves, will be much stronger, right, on that front. In terms of, I think related to that, you're probably going to ask, market share is falling, user trust may be eroded. That's not the case.
Yeah.
The user numbers continue to grow. And today we have 166 million. Last week I reported a slightly lower figure, but the users trust us because of our consistency of action. We take our custodial responsibility very seriously. In the last 6 years, going into the future, user assets are back 1-to-1. It's very important to remember, as part of the settlement, the US regulators have scrutinized our operations in quite great detail, and they do not allege there's misappropriation of user funds, which is extremely important, right? So our commitment to users is you can withdraw your assets any point in time, 100%, and that the user safety, user protection, user security, very dear and very important to us.
But now that Binance.com will no longer be allowing US investors, how do you grow your investor base? Where will that come from?
Investor base as an investor base into the company. Are you talking about that? Or investor base in terms of number of users?
I'm looking at US investors. Yeah, I'm looking at people that actually put money in Binance. You can no longer, US citizens can no longer actually go on Binance.
Binance.us is a different entity altogether, right? So that has a separate governance, has a separate set of shareholders. They are still allowed to operate in the US. Binance.com has no US users, right? So we serve the international market. There are two different entities. I think it's important not to mix them together.
But it was my understanding, Richard, that part of the problem that the DOJ had was that actually you gave access, or the previous leadership gave access to you as investors even if they couldn't. So now that that's been taken away and that will presumably be dealt with, who do you market to? Where will the growth come from?
No. For Binance.com, which is again not Binance.us, which is a totally different entity with different shareholders and different corporate governance and board of directors and structure, I can't speak on that. I can speak on Binance.com. which is serving users outside the States. We don't serve US users. On that, again, we work with different policymakers, different regulators, and we serve global users where there's a demand, where there's a need for us, where we can deploy locally, working very closely with local stakeholders, local partners, regulators, policymakers. We will do so, offering our services in those areas.
So I believe today the Philippine Securities and Exchange Commission says it's working to block users' access to Binance. Are there any other countries that you're aware of that will do the same? Are there markets in Europe that you will exit?
As you appreciate, any conversation between ourselves and regulators are confidential, so I can't speculate on that, right? So, but anytime where we face some of these issues and challenges, what we will do is to be very transparent, working with the regulators to overcome any local issues there are, right? Working with the policymakers to understand the concern, and together we will try to close those gaps and continue to push ahead with crypto adoption.
But in places where you don't have a license, could you potentially actually exit that market?
Well, I think it's important to remember that 2/3 of jurisdiction globally still do not have crypto regulations, right? So it's too broad a brush to say what we will or will not do. It really depends on local rules and requirements, and we respect all those local rules and requirements wherever we choose to deploy.
Richard, can you talk to me about France? I know there was an investigation. Is that still ongoing? Do you think you will stay in France?
Well, France is our regional headquarters for the European Union. It's important. We have been very transparent in terms of our dealings with the French regulator. And I always say that it's very important for, and I mentioned this previously, right? We submit ourselves willingly to be regulated, being very transparent with our books with the regulators, with our processes, with our framework, with our compliance program, and the list goes on. There are many other players that do business in this industry. They are not willing to be subjected to all this scrutiny. They are not willing to put themselves under the control of the regulator. And there's a marked difference. Let me stress that. That's a marked difference.
But you had no choice.
No, look, that's always choice, right? The other exchanges are not subjecting themselves to regulators. So let me finish this. We put ourselves under those purview of the regulators. We demonstrate our willingness, right, to work with them. And it's always important for regulators and for policymakers to remember, it's much better to work with companies that wish to come under your control instead of allowing them in the dark side, in the gray side, operating in an uncontrolled fashion, because you can't impose requirements on them. You can't impose controls on them, right? It's much worse for everybody. So I do think that regulators will appreciate what we are doing.
But so when do you think Binance...
3 minutes.
Francine, I think
3 minutes, I'm told. Yeah, I know, we have 3 minutes. I have a producer in my ear, so we're all good for time. When do you think, Richard, Binance can be a fully compliant crypto exchange with the working licenses, complete transparency? Will it take years? And if so, is it 2 years? Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? Again, give us a sense of what kind of time frame you're looking at.
I think it really depends on regulators as well, right? We are already regulated in 18 different jurisdictions. As I mentioned, 2/3 of global regulators have not started to regulate this space, and we are working with many of them that have approached us, by virtue of us being the largest crypto player globally, and we are responsible players, right? We want to be regulated, we want to work very closely with them to, on the one hand, support innovation and investments into this space, which makes the country much better in terms of foreign direct investments. And on the other hand, control the risk, right, element. So we are responsible players. We look to work with all regulators that wish to introduce safety, soundness, regulation into this space. And we'll continue to do so.
Yeah. Would you ever actually consider an IPO to be fully transparent?
Well, the company is in strong financial shape. Those elements, I think, at this point in time, are not my priority. My priority is to make sure that we continue to press ahead with the commitments to our stakeholders, which include our users, stakeholders like regulators to comply with global standards, and working with partners to bring about greater crypto adoption, right? So that the whole industry, the ecosystem, continue to develop in the right way. We continue to develop and grow this very exciting industry together for everyone. Bring in new talent pool, bring in new investments. Those are my key priority. Future needs really depends. I think it's too early to speculate.
Yeah. But Richard, do you think Binance has to apologize for what happened?
Look, at the beginning of this, I've already set out, right? It's a fast-growing industry. When Binance started life 6 years ago, right, as a tech startup, we have in the last 2 years made very heavy investments into our compliance program. We have pivoted very, very strongly. We are responsible, and that's why we have admitted to the mistakes. Regulators appreciate that, and it's time to move on. It's time to move on to a new chapter and to build on this foundation that we have and show that we are responsible corporates, we are responsible financial institutions, like other financial institutions, right? They have admitted to those mistakes, learn from it, move on the journey to become much better. And that's the journey we are on.
Richard, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.